So I'm Justin, and this is my session, Prepare to Research. Yeah, like Colette said, this is going to be maybe a little bit different than what you were expecting as far as preparation. This is relationships, incentives, org charts, outcomes, and most importantly, working on the right research. Colette teed me up really well with her 4 questions. But first, good research, our theme. What makes for good research? I actually tweeted this out recently. If you follow along on Twitter, you might see me trolling from time to time. Feel free to troll back. I was trolling Alec this morning about the conference. But what makes good research? I got some really good answers. It's rigorous. It seeks to do no harm. It comes from a thoughtful and trustworthy process. Often it's understandable, it's accessible, it's actionable sometimes. Sometimes we don't know what it means for a little while until we sit on it, but usually it's pretty actionable. It's well scoped, it's properly framed, it leads to insights, it informs decisions, but most importantly, it informs strategy. The best research informs our strategy. It helps people make decisions about where we're going to go next, and that is strategy. But this is not a talk about how to do good research that informs strategy. Pause for a second. We're going to zoom out, get a little existential. We're going to set some context. Maybe you are a researcher, probably, since you're sitting here. Maybe you're just someone who wants to do research. Maybe you're someone who does research as a part of your job. Maybe you're none of these things, but you want to be. But this talk is for you. It's for people who do research. You exist in a team. You exist in a team of 1 or maybe a team of 100. There are very large research teams out there. But maybe you work in a medium-sized team. Regardless of the size of the team, you exist inside of a company, an organization. Maybe that organization isn't much bigger than you. It's a startup or a consulting practice. Maybe it's a huge multinational company and you're one researcher in one department of research in one division, the giant enterprise that spans the globe. But regardless, you exist inside that organization, and that organization exists in the broader world. Now, you might be wondering why I'm doing this weird kind of unfolding the tree of life and where we sit in the universe kind of routine. But the answer is a single word that a lot of us really love if we're in research or adjacent to research, and that word is context. We as researchers exist in a context. So you're a researcher, or you're someone who does research. We're talking about what happens before you do research. We're talking about context. I think of context a lot like an onion. There's a personal context that's right around us. It's who we are. It's our personal needs. It's our goals, our identities. There's an organizational context. There's what our company exists to do, its goals, its purposes, the stories we tell each other and the world about why our company exists, or a nonprofit or a team, a consulting practice, an agency. Our organizational context is very important. And then there's that societal or wider context, how we, individuals and the world, tell each other stories about how we belong. Our organization exists to do this thing, and it exists in a broader world of context. Things like the cities we're in, things like the people we serve. So all of that context is important, but I'm going to focus on one piece of context, this middle layer, which is the organizational context, what our organization exists to do, because that is the gap that helps us prepare to do good research. So this is not a talk about how to do good research. This is a talk about all of the things you need to think about before you begin thinking about those things. So, what do you do before you do research? I'm talking about the most foundational research project that you will probably ever do in your research career, which is turning the microscope or the magnifying glass or the telescope or whatever metaphor of choice on yourself, on your company, on the people we work with and for and alongside of. We're asking the same questions we'd ask about any other research project. So testing a new interface, we have questions that we'd ask. But we're asking those same questions, the same ones we'd ask a potential user or customer or partner. We're asking things about needs. We're asking about goals. We're asking about workflows. We're asking about what's working and what's not. We're also exploring our own organization the way we'd explore a new system. How does it work? How does information flow? Where do decisions come from and where do they go? So, we're going to start with this. Organizations are composed of people. They're also systems. Kind of, the animation. So we've got a system, right? There's information that flows, diagrams. Organizations are complicated systems. But there are organizations that are actually made of people. My transition design skills are showing off a little bit today. So I need an applause light, Alec. But yeah, organizations are composed of people. They're systems made of people who make decisions that make that system do something. There's inputs and there's outputs. Turns out a lot of systems are that way when you really look at them. You realize that that process diagram that you were working with is actually a bunch of people making decisions. And the diagram doesn't show a process. It shows a way that people work together. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I'm actually going to cite someone who I think you'll hear from a little bit later, Behzad Serjani. He talks a lot about organizations as ecosystems. And I think that's really interesting as a metaphor because as researchers, our job is often to inform the decision-making process inside of the organizations we work in. When working with product managers, startups, people with deep expertise in a domain, I usually see my job as creating what I call informed intuition. I didn't come up with that term. I have seen that one floating around. I have shamelessly stolen it, but it describes the work that I do. Informed intuition. That is helping people who already make decisions make better decisions using better information, taking the intuition that got them to where they are and helping them move a little bit past that, helping them inform that intuition, helping them expand or enrich their understanding of the space that we're working in. Now, how do we do that? I come back to this a lot. This is Donella Meadows and the fantastic poem, Dancing with Systems. It is this 14-point outline of how to work with complex systems. Systems that might be dynamic, they might be multi-factor, they might be constantly changing. I find these 14 points absolutely crucial when working with any ecosystem, any complex information flow or decision-making process. Specifically, these 4 are very important to my work. Get the beat, listen to the wisdom of the system, locate responsibility in the system, and expand the boundary of caring. Those 4 are the foundation for what I do before I even start thinking about doing research. Story time. So as a researcher, I have had a lot of interactions with product managers in my time, but there's one that stands out to me. It was earlier in my career. It was when I was still making sense of this type of work. There was this product manager I worked with. I was new to the organization, and I was talking to her about what we were trying to do. I started asking her, what are her goals? Like, what are you trying to do? And she started listing off a bunch of metrics. She was responsible for increasing some revenue. She needed to get downloads up because that was part of it. She had this whole list. She had a scorecard. She had a presentation that she was responsible for updating to take back to her leaders and her leaders' leaders to tell them how her product was performing. And as she was explaining, I was listening, I was taking notes, looking for the things that she was most accountable for. But finally, I broke in and I said, but what about your goals? What about you? You as a person, what are you working towards? Are you working towards a promotion? Are you working to work on a pet project more? Do you want to change the type of work that you're doing? It was an awkward question. I was a little bit new to the work. I was new to the organization. She didn't know me. In retrospect, maybe I would have asked it a little differently, but probably not. It was still an important question. I needed to understand what made her tick. Why was she approaching this work? What did she care about? And the reason for that is because I needed to build a relationship with her. Because relationships are absolutely crucial to the work we do as researchers. We build relationships with our participants all the time. That's what we do in a session. We craft our discussion guide to help us build a relationship in the space of 30 minutes, an hour and a half, so that we can get to good insights, so that they can trust us and share their experiences with them. But that also happens inside of our organizations as well. We need to build relationships with the people who we're going to share those insights with, who we're going to bring into the field with us. Ad-lib self-plagiarization joke, because I've written about this. I'm going to quote myself here. It's a piece that me and a close collaborator, Lena Blackstock, wrote for D-Scout. Relationships are the wire that insights travel on. You're way more likely to trust someone or something from someone who you already have a relationship with, especially if that something contradicts something else you already believe to be true. And that's something that we as researchers find ourselves doing a lot, especially when creating informed intuition. We're working with people who have deep expertise about their problem space. They've been working with this product probably longer than we have, possibly thought more about it than we have. They're product managers who have decks and reports and statistics and projections. They understand the space they're working in. And we are the researcher coming in and helping inform their understanding. Sometimes we discover things that don't line up with their model of the world. And in order to negotiate that, that requires trust, that requires a relationship. We can't just come in as this outside third party and say, hey, everything you believe to be true about this problem you're trying to solve for people or the people you're trying to solve it from is wrong. They're not going to listen. They're going to reject that pretty quickly, because I know if someone does that for me, if they came to me and said, hey, Justin, everything you know about coffee, something you love incredibly much. Love coffee. Let's get coffee later. Everything you know about coffee is wrong. You've been making coffee wrong this whole time. My first thing is going to be, well, who are you and why are you telling me this? Because I've been caring about coffee for longer than I've even known that you, outside third party, existed. I need someone with a relationship. If my favorite barista tells me that I'm doing something that I should be doing differently, or that I could improve my coffee brewing experience by changing something, I'll trust them because I know this person, because I trust them to make good coffee and I have a relationship with them. So relationships are this wire that insights travel on. In order for us to share, especially those radically outside of the field of view insights that we as researchers live to find, we need to have a relationship to share those in. I also expanded on this a little bit. Relationships are the site of the foundational work of caring for each other, of reflection and understanding, of learning and of accountability. This goes beyond just the wire that insights travel on. This is the place where we as people do the work of being people, is in relationships. And as researchers, we can't lose sight of that. This is a place where we, along with our product managers, our designers, our engineering partners, our partners in sales, marketing, consumer experience, wherever they sit, we're always learning together. That's our role as researchers, is we help the organization learn. And relationships are where we do that work. This is where we expand the boundary of caring. This is where we understand the wisdom of the system. This is where we learn what makes the people we work with tick, show that we care about them, and help them expand their field of view to learn the things that we, as researchers, are learning about the space that we work in. I actually, after writing that paper, found this incredible research paper. It's a scoping paper called Building a Culture of Learning at Scale. It was written by Fiona McKenzie, and it outlines a framework. It outlines a framework for building organizations that learn at scale. You'll notice the two first things are mindsets and relationships. Those are foundational to building this organization that learns at scale. Mindsets and relationships. Shifting mindsets can only be done inside of a relationship. And so that brings us back to relationships being this foundational work that we need to do as researchers if we are going to help inform the intuition of the people we work with. If we're going to inform the organization and help decisions be made that lead to better outcomes, that use better information, that lead to better results, better caring, more empathy for the people that we work with, we're going to need to do that inside of relationships, which means we're going to need to invest in building relationships. Relationships are foundational to doing good research. Absolutely. Sorry that the text is kind of crammed together. I'm a researcher, not a designer. So, how do we build good relationships? That could be a talk all on its own, and that's not exactly what I'm here to talk about. There's plenty of people who do the lecture circuit. They talk about building empathy and building relationships, and they write books, and you can walk into Barnes & Noble and buy probably 100 books just right now on like how to build relationships. I'm not talking about that specifically, but I do want to recommend this book. It's a book called The Trusted Advisor. It's typically seen as a sales book or a consulting book or like a management kind of book. I ran across it early in my career when I was working at an agency. We did a lot of client service, and so this was a book that was recommended to all new hires. While it usually exists in that self-help businessy section for people who, sell contracts for a living, I found fantastic advice in here. It's got advice on how to elevate your relationships with stakeholders from just what they call a knowledgeable subject matter expert, someone who's really smart, someone who people come to when they need an answer about a topic of expertise, to something they call the trusted advisor, someone who people come to for things that might even be outside of your expertise, but they trust you enough to seek your opinion or to seek your advice because they see you not as just an expert, they see you as an advisor, someone who can help them pay attention to things or shape their worldview. Some of the highlights that have helped me over the years is the way they define trust. Again, we need to trust people that we're going to get insights from, so people who are going to get insights from you need to trust you. Trust is something that grows over time. You have to build it. You have to earn it. It's both emotional and rational. That one really helped me a lot. It's built on demonstrated expertise and care. Again, we have care, that word, care, expanding the boundary of care, relationships being the site where care is demonstrated. Relationships that are trusted advisor relationships, these trusted relationships, require mutual investment. You can't just go in and trust. You need people to trust you back. But they're not going to just trust you unless you give trust as well. So it's this mutual investment. You both put things into the relationship. You negotiate to a trust. And most terrifyingly, it depends on vulnerability. It depends on being open and being open to being hurt. You have to trust, you have to be vulnerable, you have to be open in these relationships. It's a messy process. You have to be careful, but it's important that you put yourself out there and ask your stakeholders to do the same so that you can get to that level of trust. So that's my little spiel on building relationships. How do we use relationships to do good research? Good question. When you hear something like using relationships, I think of this guy. If you don't know who this guy is, this is The Prince by Machiavelli. Using relationships, manipulating people, getting them to do the thing you want them to do. No, I'm not talking about that guy. I'm talking about authentic and trustful relationships. Relationships built on that foundation of mutual care and understanding, compassion, accountability to one another. So, how do we use relationships to do good research? Relationships are where you build trust. This is absolutely crucial when it comes time to deliver those insights and influence strategy. We already talked a little bit about that, but I'll share some tactics here in just a second. Beyond that, though, relationships are a place where you can understand your context. You understand the people you work with. You understand who they are, what makes them tick, how the organization works. You understand the people that are behind those boxes, and when the box connects to the other box, connects to the other box, you understand how that all works under the surface. They're very important for helping you to find places to dig, for you to share your expertise as a researcher, get to that trusted advisor relationship, and build trust in your research practice so that people aren't undermining your expertise. They're not undermining your methodology choices because they trust you, because they see you as someone who not only has mastery in the field, but can advise them on decisions. But most importantly, it helps you find those places to do good research, finding the places to dig. So a little bit more tactics that we can use. Number one, building trust. These are one-on-ones and office hours. So one-on-ones, well, actually, I'm going to start with office hours. Office hours are a great place to feel the beat and to expand the boundary of caring. They're a really good way to expand relationships. They're very powerful if you are building or rebuilding a research practice, a place where I've used them quite a bit. They can be an open time for people to just drop in with you. They can be casual, they can be formal. I've done an afternoon coffee chat that was research hours where I just sat around a table by myself until people joined me, drinking my coffee alone with a little sign that says, ask me about research. I'm a researcher, I can help. Right now, I do a mix of drop-in time and appointments because I work for a remote company. I can't sit at a table and wait for people to show up. I have to tell them I'm there. So I have a block on my calendar where people can just drop in, and then I have a block where they can book time with me, a researcher who can help answer their questions. The specific details are going to vary from team to team. Remote companies will do it one way, in-person companies another. Companies that are tea drinkers one way, a company that's coffee drinkers a different way. It also is going to depend on you. What's authentic for you? What's the right move for you as an individual to host these office hours? The important thing is that you make yourself available. You as a researcher showing up at a place where people can come to depend on you and they can come to find you, ask you questions, things that they might not even know how to ask. I have people bring me a Google Doc and say, I'm trying to learn something about this document. Can you help? We start from there. We start with where they are and we work towards what they're trying to learn. Maybe we get to talking about research methods, or maybe I send them on their way and I never hear from them again and I have to follow up in a month and ask them how that project went. But what I do is I make myself available for them to come, get my expertise, get my advice, just build a relationship. That helps me develop relationships and also hear what's going on in the organization, catching that beat. What are people caring about, learning about, trying to unpack for themselves? One-on-ones. Another great place to do this. You can tell I really like coffee. One-on-ones are a very good place to deepen relationships, not just widen, because in office hours, you cast a wide net. You get people from all across the company to come talk to you. But one-on-ones are a place to deepen those relationships. I recommend you set one-on-ones with everyone you work with closely, especially if it's a new team, one that you haven't worked with before, a new engagement at the beginning of a project. Again, going to vary on details on what works for you as a person, but some things that worked for me. A 30-minute end-of-day coffee chat. Me and a product manager sat down together for a quick coffee chat before we headed off into our respective commutes home. Right now, I have a few where I do a virtual whiteboard hangout. I open up a virtual whiteboard, and I put sticky notes on there sometimes, and they put sticky notes on there sometimes, and every once in a while, we get on Slack at the same time, and we Slack about the things that are on the virtual whiteboard. There's no synchronous time at all with some of these because that's just not what works for me and that other person. When we were in person, I did a mid-morning coffee run. We'd go grab lattes and we'd talk while we walked. I've done pre-work coffee meetings. Again, coffee is great. So is food. Eating lunch with people is a great way to get to know them, to open up a place where you can talk. But the important thing, again, is showing up as a person to be authentic and listen to them about what they are struggling with. Back to my conversation with that product manager. What are your goals? Are you trying to get promoted? Are you trying to stop doing a certain type of work? Is there a project that you really don't care about that you just wish would go away? Can I help that happen for you? So that's one-on-ones in office hours. That's a great way to get that pulse, that beat, and deepen those relationships. But you can also use them to understand context, primarily through stakeholder discovery. I think Tuesday or Thursday, there will be a little bit more talk about stakeholders. I'm going to preview a little bit of how I work with stakeholders. Stakeholder conversations are a gateway into understanding the context of an organization. A healthy stakeholder ecosystem is one of my most valuable tools in my toolbox. It helps me get to some of the most important parts of research work. Good relationships with your stakeholders help when it's time to get buy-in for research. But they help with a few more things than that, and I'll explain what I mean here in a second. Stakeholders, who are they? They're anyone with an interest in the work that you're doing. This means anyone you might need that buy-in from. This means anyone who might be using the information you produce to make decisions. This means anyone who's going to be possibly a subject matter expert who can help you understand the decision-making process that already exists on the team or the things that the company already knows. Not every SME is a stakeholder, but it doesn't hurt to treat them as such until proven otherwise. So, stakeholder discovery. Some tips that I've learned from across the years of doing this. Explore priorities up and down. You can have a conversation with someone and you explore their priorities and also the priorities above them. What are the org's priorities as this stakeholder understands them? Because, surprise, when you talk to people about priorities and you ask the same question to different people, you get different answers, even when it's very clearly communicated, because everyone understands it slightly differently. And what are their priorities personally? What do they care about? What are they trying to do? Again, are they just trying to get a project across a milestone so that they can take a week-long vacation that they've been putting off for a few months? Or are they trying to get a product out there that they can be proud of? Or are they trying to hit a specific personal milestone? Are they just trying to give their team some breathing room by clearing off the backlog so that they can slow down and focus on some housekeeping that they've been putting off? Those priorities are important because as a researcher, if you are helping inform decisions that aren't their priority, you're going to be working uphill. And how do decisions get made? That's another thing you can explore in stakeholder discovery. Who is making which decisions? And what signals are being used to make them? Are people relying a lot on a specific dashboard? Are they using the analytics from Heap that they're pulling out to make their decisions? Are they having conversations themselves with customers or users or other stakeholders? How are they influencing those decisions? Because if you're coming in and contradicting a signal that they already rely on, you really need to know what that signal is telling them and why they rely on it. Because if I, as a researcher, come in and say, I just talked to 10 people, and they say this thing is very important to them, and the product manager says, but I was looking at Heap, and it doesn't say that that's important at all. We are now dealing with different pieces of information, and we're going to need to get to an agreement there on what we actually care about. So going into that with your eyes open, Knowing what signals are being used helps you not fight signals that are trustworthy, that are reliable, and also helps you focus the way that you share insights. So ask your stakeholders questions. I'm going to give credit to all hundreds of people who have helped me over the years because I've read so many books and so many blog posts and listened to so many talks. But especially Dan Klein at the Understanding Group, who will recognize a couple of these questions if he watches this talk. Some of these have been taken directly from a stakeholder discovery guide that he provided that I've found incredibly valuable. I'm going to share a copy of this deck that will have all these resources in it and links to all of that. There'll be like a little list of resources at the end. So don't feel like you have to write it all down. Templates are amazing. But this is a set of questions that I have used. I modify them. I don't run them verbatim. But a list of questions that get at that priorities up and down, that get at understanding how decisions are made. So unpack this a little bit. And apologies for the formatting on this. It's a little wonky, but we'll make it work. So at the top, we have what projects, initiatives, and metrics are you responsible for? It's kind of an establishing question. What are they focused on? What are they caring about? What are their responsibilities? That helps you understand the org's priorities as they understand them. Why are these the top priorities? And what does success look like for those? This helps you understand their priorities personally and understand the difference between the two because you're asking them, what are you responsible for? But also, what does success look like? And you're challenging them to explain it both from the organization standpoint, 100 million downloads, $1 billion in revenue, whatever those metrics are, versus them. I just want my backlog clear. I just want to get to this next feature out. I just want the guy from sales to stop telling me that the big customer will sign the contract if I ship that feature. Because the reality is sometimes those are motivations. So then, what feedback loops or signals do you currently rely on? And do you trust those feedback loops? Which helps us get at who makes decisions and what signals are being used to make them. Because in that discussion, after asking that question, you can understand not just who is giving them this information and how they're passing information on, but what information is even contained there in the first place. And then asking that follow-up question, do you trust it, helps you find places where you, as a researcher, can step in. Because if they don't trust their feedback signals, that's a place where you can offer to help. As a researcher, I can help with that. You don't know if the dashboard is accurate? Let me go do some interviews and see if I learn the same thing. Then, how can I make my research findings actionable for you and your team? Which is where you position yourself as a partner. You let them know that you're there to help them. And then finally, where do we have the most to learn? Are there any documents, reports, data, or other artifacts that will help inform my perspective as a researcher? And who should I talk to next? Which allows you to acknowledge the wisdom of the system and tap into the wisdom of the system. Things that we already know to be true, you acknowledge. Those might be true, even if we learn something that contradicts them later. You also tap into the things we already know, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Listen for those opportunities. As you learn about their priorities, keep track of them. Keep track of your stakeholders, what they care about, what they're focused on. Keep track of what they already know, what we as an organization already know, and where there might be some faith that needs to be built up in that understanding. Keep track of what priorities have been decided by whom. Why is it a priority? What do we already know about this, and what have we already learned? Because this is going to help you not retread already trodden ground. Because if the organization spent a year deciding something, one research project might not be enough to question that. It might not be worth it for you to even focus on that because we've decided this is the strategy, we're moving forward. How can you help inform that strategy though, not contradict that strategy? And that's not to say you toe the line and you constantly just reinforce decisions that were already made. But that's to say that if you do contradict something that's already been set, you're doing it intentionally from inside of those relationships with an understanding of what we already believe to be true and what we already have a little bit of doubt in. And that transitions us here, finding those places to dig. So as researchers, we do love to create insight. But something I've learned the hard way multiple times is that sometimes the best way to create insight is not doing research. It's actually finding information that we already have in the organization. It's finding the report that the sales team did about the things that their customers are asking them for. And as a researcher, I definitely put that at the top of my list of things that I want to go back and check or go back and redo or go back and do a formal survey or study or interview spate on. But sometimes the best way to get the insight that the team needs right now is not to do that research now, but to take the thing we already know and make sure that people are aware of it and are aware of its caveats, its limitations, and how we might build more confidence. Sometimes the best way to an insight isn't research. But as you hear questions, things that people want to learn, keep track of them. This is an example of a research objectives board that I made one time, where we divided it into exploration areas and a statement, I want to learn. We ran it as a workshop with a bunch of product managers and designers, where we had them write on a sticky note things that they wanted to learn, and we recorded them on this board. And then we started to tag them to studies or reports that we had already done, research insights that we had already generated, potential topic areas. But more importantly, we started to see gaps. You can see there's a bunch of places where the field is just empty. That helped us see that we didn't have anything to answer this question already, and that helped us find places to dig. And why do I bring all this up? Because the most effective way to conserve your energy as a researcher and to make sure that your partners trust you and that you're not wasting time running in circles is to play where the company is going to be paying attention, not necessarily where you as a researcher see the most urgent thing right now. Tired sports metaphor, I meta joke. But this is research strategy. This is something that I learned about from reading blog posts from people like Chris Geisen on DScout. He has a really good article that I'll link to about what is research strategy. This is the teeing up for research strategy. It's understanding what research is most important for the company to do right now, what research is going to help drive the most important decisions. How do we help shape that research so that the methodology matches the type of insight we need in order to get to the next place we're going? Because it's easy to put together a usability study, but if the results of a usability study aren't going to be the type of information that will help us make the decision that we as a company need to make right now, usability study might not be the right path forward. Even though that information might be valuable, it might not be the most valuable thing right now based on what our stakeholders are caring about, based on what our company is trying to do, based on what our team needs to do to help shift mindsets and build trust. So it's a lot, and I'm going to open it up for questions. But one more thing. I skipped over the societal and personal contexts because I was talking about the organizational context. Societal and personal context is an important thing for us to understand, how we as people exist in the world and how that world sees our organization and us, how our users and customers and people we will support exist in the world. Preparing for research requires unpacking all of that, and deepening our practice as people who care about other people requires that we deepen our practice of understanding other people, understanding their needs and challenges, especially if we claim to have the human-centered practice that we often claim to have. This is a quick plug for humanity-centered classes and workshops that have helped me quite a bit, and a reading list. Again, I'll link to all of these. These are fantastic pieces of writing that have helped me. They don't usually show up on design reading lists because they're not technically designed books, but these are the books that as a researcher and strategist, as someone who works in design and product thinking, these books have shaped my thinking more than any product management, research, or design book that I've read. Highly recommend them for your summer reading. And if you watch on Twitter, Pedagogy of the Oppressed is one of my favorite books, and I will be talking a little bit about it on Twitter. And with that, thank you.